Designing a greenhouse fungicide program includes a range of considerations, including the crops being grown, the risk for disease in that particular greenhouse, all of the other products being applied, and of course, greenhouse environmental conditions. But first, we must start with some very basic plant pathology concepts. So in order for disease to develop, three things must be present. That includes a susceptible host. Now, by susceptible host, that could be a particular plant type, a genus, a particular species, even a plant cultivar. In some cases, certain diseases will affect only certain type of tissue. So in terms of fruit diseases, certain diseases may only affect fruit as they begin to ripen. So a susceptible host must be present. Secondly, the pathogen must be present. Now, by pathogen, we can mean fungi, bacteria, water molds, viruses, and nematodes. So that pathogen must be present in order for disease to occur. Notice that all of these pathogens that I mentioned are microorganisms. We cannot see them with the naked eye. We see their symptoms, but we do not see those microscopic pathogens. And the third component for disease to develop is a conducive environment. So in short, that means we need free water. That means any available water from irrigation to rain to humidity to dew or fog. And we also need moderate temperatures. So I like to say, if I'm comfortable, then that pathogen is comfortable. So now if conditions are not conducive, a couple of things can happen. Either the pathogen won't produce the cells, the infective cells needed to infect the next crop, or that pathogen will go dormant. So the pathogen can just hang out and remain dormant until conducive conditions will return. So again, all three of these components must be present in order for disease to develop. Now, if any of those components are manipulated or not present, then disease cannot develop. So as we go through this talk today, and especially as I talk about fungicide programs, think about how you can manipulate each of these things so that disease cannot develop. Okay, so with fungicides, we'll be eliminating a pathogen, at least in theory. But with sanitation, we remove the pathogen, sometimes removing the susceptible host. By using resistant cultivars, we can remove a susceptible host, or by monitoring and maintaining lower relative humidity, we can manipulate the environment. So think about all those things as we go through today. And before we move on, there are a few additional items that are worth discussing. So first of all, infection is different than disease or symptom development. So infection can occur days or weeks, and in some cases, months before we actually see the symptoms. So as we talk about disease management, we talk about preventative measures, we're specifically talking about treating plants or preventing disease before infection occurs, right? So the difference between treating after infection or after symptom development is very different than protecting plants and preventing that infection from occurring in the first place. So ideally, our diseases are managed preventatively, again, before that infection occurs. After infection occurs, we can suppress disease using cultural practices and fungicides, but we cannot cure disease, okay? Fungicides do not cure disease, and I think that's very important that we just establish that before we move on. So we're using fungicides as preventatives, as protectants. We're not using fungicides as curatives. Okay, so it's evident by my earlier mentions, remember that disease triangle that we saw, that using fungicides are one way of eliminating the pathogen component of that disease triangle. Keep in mind, though, that when using fungicides and when establishing a fungicide program, a couple of things very important. First of all, any pesticide, fungicides, and other types of pesticides must include the crop that you're using it on. Secondly, that pesticide label must state that it can be used in a greenhouse. There are a couple of caveats here. What we call a silent label, which is implying that it can be used in a certain way. Okay, so maybe a silent label might say that the product is can be used on ornamentals, or it might say it can be used on fruits, vegetables, ornamentals, and other flowering plants. So that would be an implied use. So it might not specifically say can be used in a greenhouse or can be used in a particular crop, but it cannot say that it cannot. Okay, so if specific plants are labeled, that means you're looking for your specific plant. Or if it says that that greenhouse use is restricted, that's clearly defined, and that product cannot be used on that particular crop in that particular situation. So as we go through too, think about compatibility of fungicides with insecticides, plant growth regulators, foliar nutrients, adjuvants, anything that you would add. So we're not just talking about fungicides a lot of times. If you're going to tank mix or if you're going to use products in rapid succession, there must be compatibility. And I'm not discussing that today, but do keep that in mind as you develop your own fungicide program. Okay, so again, diseases cannot be cured. I cannot say that enough. Diseases cannot be cured by fungicides. So we manage diseases primarily through prevention, and that's the key. So fungicides will protect plants from so that infections cannot occur. We're using them preventatively before infections. Now, if we're going to prevent very common diseases, those that we know will occur year after year or season after season, we typically think about a lot of our foliar diseases, molds such as Botrytis gray mold, or mildews like powdery mildew. We can also think about what I like to call historical diseases. So if your greenhouse has a history of a certain disease, you would call that a common disease, and that would definitely be a major consideration as you develop your fungicide program. And it's rare that we can successfully predict all of the diseases on all of our crops in our greenhouse. Okay, there will inevitably be one or more diseases that will develop. In this case, we'll use fungicides on an as needed basis. Okay, so typically our root rots, crown rots can be sporadic or not occur regularly. There can also be more atypical things or things that we really did not expect to come in, and they kind of blindside us. So that would be an as needed fungicide use. And of course, remember that because fungicides cannot cure, our approach then is to use fungicides after outbreaks. And we would be using them to, number one, suppress disease, to slow disease down. Now, caveat here is that generally we cannot sell disease plants. So once a disease is present, generally we would eliminate that plant, erode that plant from our system. There are exceptions, of course, not enough time today, but suppressing disease would be the function of a fungicide once an outbreak occurs. But more importantly, our goal would be to protect healthy plants nearby, maybe another batch or another cultivar or another type of plant nearby. So you would use fungicides that way if disease occurred and then you became reactive to the situation. Fungicides, though, are not magic bullets. As much as we want them to be, we utilize them that way, but fungicides will not cure and they will not solve all of our problems. Okay? They cannot stand alone in a disease management program. So we use cultural practices to reduce the inoculum load and to manipulate the conditions that are conducive to disease development. So cultural practices would be anything that we can physically do to manipulate, remember that disease triangle we saw early on. Okay, ideally we would combine cultural practices with fungicides, but there are some systems that are no spray and they would use cultural practices alone. What we never want to do is use fungicides alone without cultural practices incorporated into our disease management program. They must go hand in hand. So some examples of cultural practices or cultural management would be, for example, air circulation. So by using ventilation, like physical ventilation in a greenhouse, or by pruning and spacing plants for improved air circulation, we're drying out leaves, so we're reducing moisture, we're changing those environmental conditions so that humidity is not as high and free water is not available. So that's that approach there. Water management, so not overwatering or keeping the floors drier. Again, that's eliminating that free water component. I use the word sanitation a lot. So sanitation is just keeping things clean. So by sanitation, we can clean surfaces, our tools, our equipment as we come in and out of greenhouses or zones, or as we move from one block to another. And a block could be a cultivar or a plant age group or a shipment, for example. So always blocking. So sanitation, keeping everything clean. Ideally, we would fallow our greenhouse between crops. So at the end of the spring, for example, we would empty our entire greenhouse or zone. We would clean everything with some type of disinfestant, and then we would start our next crop. And by the way, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show a link to some of our publications, and there are some disinfestation publications in there that I highly recommend. And also, in terms of sanitation, we can rogue plants. As plants die or if plants are infected and cannot be cured, getting them out before the pathogen can sporulate and infect nearby plants. So sometimes that's removing fruit, or sometimes that's removing certain plant tissue. Maybe we can prune. A lot of times that's removing entire plants, maybe entire flats. So any dead, dying, or diseased tissue should always come out. In addition, weeds can often serve as a green bridge and carry the pathogen from season to season or from crop to crop. So when we talk about roguing, that also means keeping a weed-free environment in your greenhouse. Resistant cultivars, I mentioned this earlier. Anytime there's a resistant cultivar available, I highly recommend trying it. It'll save lots of money in fungicides and reduce that risk of any losses from disease. And then finally, plant health. Healthy plants are much more resilient and can often fight off disease, especially low levels of disease, very early on. So plant health is really critical. Weak plants or stressed plants are more susceptible to infections. So plant health is definitely a part of cultural practices. Also important is that diseases cannot be confirmed by symptoms. So symptoms are the part you see. That's the wilts, that's the necrosis, that's the chlorosis, that's the soft rots or the root rots or the mushiness or the smell. So symptoms cannot be used to diagnose plant diseases. Lots of different symptoms across different disease types look alike, even though the pathogen is different and they're managed differently. So very important to use a plant disease diagnostic lab. Those are usually located at local universities. So tap into your local university plant disease diagnostic lab system. There are also private labs. I am partial to university labs. They're usually cheaper and non-biased. Always confirm disease through a plant disease diagnostic lab, especially if you are a commercial grower. Very important. And then you're going to maintain records. Maintain records of the things of these diagnostic reports, the things you see and when you see them. So there will be diseases, for example, like powdery mildew that you will not send to the plant disease diagnostic lab. You might have a plant or two that goes to the diagnostic lab, and then every time you see that disease after that, marking it down in your record book, maybe not submitting a sample every time. But all of these records and all of these confirmations all culminate into what we're doing here today, and that's developing a fungicide spray schedule. So I like to consider 5 to 10 years of data when I develop a spray schedule. And I know that's a lot, and we can talk about that a little bit more as we go. If you are a new grower and you don't know what those common diseases would be, or if you don't have 5 or 10 years of data, definitely talk to your county extension agent. They can help you and tell you what some of the more common diseases are with local growers or in your state. or what's going on, what's relevant in terms of the industry at that time. So definitely tap into your county extension agent, and they have access to your specialist, for example, your plant pathologist or your entomologist or whatever your needs may be. And then finally, growers need reliable resources. But unfortunately, greenhouse resources are limited. I always aim for university-based resources first. Again, they're non-biased. We're not trying to sell anything to you. So always start with your university-based or a local university-based resource. If you can't find that, some of our industries do have really great resources. I'm not going to name any in particular, but there are limited resources out there when we compare them to fruits or vegetables or row crops. So ornamentals are much more complicated and definitely greenhouse resources. Unfortunately, we just don't have what we want. But the few resources that we have are really excellent. A lot of times they will provide efficacy rating for fungicides. So anytime you can have an efficacy rating, they'll show you the effectiveness of different products, and you can compare and contrast as you go. So my favorite resources, I have them listed here. The University of Georgia publishes the Georgia Pest Management Handbook. It's free online. Now this includes all pests of all crops, so you'll have to find commercial edition and then click ornamentals or vegetables if you're growing vegetables in the greenhouse. I also really like the New England Greenhouse Floriculture Guide. So this is a hard copy guide. It's spiral bound, and it's a really excellent guide. Highly recommend that one as well. I really rely a lot on those two. And if any of you are growing vegetables, then I recommend here in the Southeast, and Kentucky is kind of in the Southeast, the Southeastern U.S. Vegetable Crop Handbook. So that's kind of we call that one SEVU, but there are also some other regional guides that might be more appropriate to where you are. But making sure that you've got greenhouse recommendations in those vegetable sources. So you can also look for greenhouse specific guides. Sometimes there are specific greenhouse vegetable guides or publications from local universities. So now let's put all of this information together. All right, we're going to have an example here, and that example is going to be my greenhouse. Now, I really don't have a greenhouse, but let's pretend that Nicole has a greenhouse. My greenhouse is 1,500 square feet undercover. I have different zones, but I grow lots of different things. In the spring, I do vegetable transplants because they bring in lots of money and a new customer base. I have vegetable plants, fancy containers, and hanging baskets. And in the fall, I also do vegetable transplants and bedding plants, as well as seasonal flowers like mums and poinsettias. So that's going to be our example scenario today. So now let's zone in and let's develop a fungicide program for some of my crops. Okay, so our scenario one is impatiens. Impatiens baskets, as a matter of fact. Okay, so with my impatiens baskets, I look back in my notebook, so I've kept 10 years worth of data, and I know what my top diseases are. Okay, so this is out of 10 years. I've got Botrytis gray mold 9 years out of 10. And Botrytis is an airborne fungus, so it's always here, but it can only establish if our relative humidity is above 85%. And I've just learned that. So I've started regulating my humidity and increasing my air circulation in my greenhouse, but still I need a fungicide program to help me manage Botrytis because I know it's common in my greenhouse on my impatiens. Secondly, Pythium root rot. So in my pretend scenario, Pythium root rot has occurred 5 out of the last 10 years. And Pythium root rot is a soil-borne oomycete or water mold. It is soil-borne, it attacks roots, and it will usually come in with bad plugs, or it can come in contaminated media, or if you're not sanitizing between crops, it could be carrying over from a previous year. So I've recently learned about disinfesting my greenhouse between crops, and I'm going to start fallowing my greenhouse in between seasons, but still, I think that Pythium is a top disease for my impatiens zone in my greenhouse. Next, bacterial soft rot, and that's a root rot. This is usually a secondary disease or a secondary pathogens that move in 4 years out of 10. And I've learned recently that this is an overwatering issue. So I'm going to manage that, but it's still 4 years out of 10. Those are some severe losses, at least for me as a small grower. Rhizoctonia stem rot, that one I think came in a few years. I didn't do a good job disinfesting between crops. 3 years out of 10, but I did lose some profits. And then finally, Impatiens downy mildew, 2 years out of 10, but I haven't seen Impatiens downy mildew since 2016. So not a top priority for me right now, but I've seen what it can do. It can cause devastating losses. Okay, so this is my scenario. This is my greenhouse history. But I can't focus on everything. So I have decided that I'm going to develop a fungicide program for Botrytis gray mold and Pythium root rot only. Those are going to be my priorities. Remember, I've learned about cultural practices. I'm going to start my year off right, but Botrytis and Pythium, those matter enough. I am concerned about those. Those are going to be the baseline for the basis for my fungicide program. All right, so I've gone to these guides, the ones I've told you about. I have gone to these guides and I have identified some products that are effective against these two primary pathogens in my my guide. Okay, so Botrytis gray mold, some of the top fungicides are Cleary's 2636, Pageant, and Spectro 90. And then for Pythium, Banrot, Pageant, Spectro 90, and Subdue Max. So those are some common fungicides. That's not the only ones, but those are the ones that I have chosen to consider in my fungicide program at this point. Now let's look at the labels of these products. Okay, so Cleary's 2636 is a thiophanate methyl, FRAC 1, and iprodione, FRAC 2. So remember that FRAC is our fungicide resistance coding system, and so it kind of helps us with our rotations. Fungicide rotations and fungicide resistance are not the topic of this talk. It is something that every grower should consider, but we're not going to go down that road today. But let's get back. So Cleary's 2636 is a FRAC 1 plus a FRAC 2. The intervals on the label: 7 to 14 days for foliar applications, 2 weeks if used as a drench. Now here we have it as for Botrytis gray mold. So clearly we would be using it as a foliar spray, right? Pageant is a boscalid, FRAC 7, and pyraclostrobin, FRAC 11. That's a 7 to 14 day foliar or drench. Again, we're using it as a foliar spray for Botrytis gray mold, but look at it's listed there for Pythium root rot. So Pageant as a for Pythium root rot, we would probably use as a drench, right? Spectro 90, again, thiophanate methyl, FRAC 1. So this is the second time we've seen thiophanate methyl. And chlorothalonil, which is has a multi-site inhibition. So that one, we don't worry about disease resistance as much, but chlorothalonil can be applied at, no more than every 7 days as a foliar, drench, or through chemigation. Now, Spectro 90, we see it twice on my list, right? It again is effective against gray mold, effective against Pythium root rot. So that's another one. So both Pageant and Spectro 90 are good products for both of my top diseases in this example scenario. Now we've got a couple of additional products that are more Pythium specific. So Banrot is a thiophanate methyl, which is a FRAC 1. It is effective against fungi. And etradiazole is a FRAC 14. It is effective against water molds. And Pythium root rot is a water mold. Now that interval is just once every 4 to 12 weeks. Okay, so we typically use Banrot at planting or close to planting, and we usually only use it that once. So again, at planting, right after planting, but it could also do a good job with that thiophanate methyl in there. It could also do a good job against any soil-borne fungi as well as soil-borne water molds. And then finally, subdue max. That is a frac 4 that is specifically to water molds. And this one applied no more than every 6 weeks as a drench, chemigation, or as a surface spray. So consider everything we know here. What kind of fungicide program would we put together? What kind of rotation? And how long is this crop going to be in your greenhouse, right? Is it a 6-week crop? Or are you going to sell small plants? Is it an 8-week crop? A 12-week crop? All of that is really relevant. And again, we're applying these preventatively. We're not waiting for disease to develop. We're applying them preventatively. So now let's think about those as needed products from these other two plant diseases that are not really on my priority list, but let's talk about them anyway. So Rhizoctonia, crown and root rot. Okay, so products listed there. Band rot. Remember, we just saw band rot was listed earlier. Cleary's 2636, Pageant and Spectro90, and downy mildew. Haven't seen downy mildew in my greenhouse since 2016, but Mancozeb, Mycora, Pageant, and Subdue Max. Now I'm going to bring up that fungicide table I had in the previous slide. Okay, so remember band rot, the thiophanate methyl is effective against fungi, and Rhizoctonia is a fungi. So band rot we know now is effective for both Rhizoctonia, crown and root rot, and against Pythium root rot. All right. Also look at Pageant and Spectro90. So we're seeing those again, right? We saw them previously. And then Pageant also effective against downy mildew, but there's that Subdue Max, and Subdue Max was listed for our Pythium root rot. So even though we're targeting our common diseases of Botrytis, gray mold, and Pythium root rot, we also see some products that can help as preventatives against these secondary or these more minor diseases that we have had in the past in our greenhouse. And again, these are as needed. Okay, so we're going to only use these as needed if there's an outbreak, but if we're using them preventatively against those more common diseases, in this example, Botrytis, gray mold, and Pythium, well, they're there. They've already got some efficacy for us. All right, now let's look at a second crop. All right, so our second crop, same greenhouse. Remember, I'm a very small grower in my example scenario. I'm going to consider tomato transplants. So in my example scenario, I direct seed tomatoes in late winter, and I sell tomato transplants because it brings in a lot of people. So my historical records tell me that Pythium root rot, 7 out of the last 10 years, I've had Pythium root rot losses. Pythium damping off, and that affects seeds as seedlings emerge. So Pythium damping off of seedlings, 6 out of 10 years. Botrytis, gray mold, that's another repeat, 6 out of 10 years. Late blight, which is caused by Phytophthora, which is another water mold, just like Pythium, 2 out of 10 years. And bacterial spot of tomato, 1 out of every 10 years. So in this example scenario, we're going to look at the three top diseases. Pythium root rot, we've talked about that one earlier. Pythium damping off, which affects seeds as they germinate or after they germinate. And Botrytis, gray mold, which is a fungal disease that we see again in high humidity situations. All right, and then our products that are effective against these three diseases. Notice they are different than what we saw for the Impatiens. That's because vegetables and ornamentals often have very different products. So be careful of the crop that's labeled here, okay? If you're growing vegetables, you need a vegetable guide, and you must closely follow what's on the label. Okay, so the Pythium root rot, Pythium damping off, effective products for them, Prevacure Flex and Ranman. And Botrytis, gray mold, not the same products we saw when we were looking at gray mold on Impatiens. For vegetables, Fontellus, Luna Tranquility, and Switch would be the ones that I'm considering here in my example scenario. So I'm not going to pull back up that table that I had earlier. We're not going to repeat that exercise, but think about that these are different products, and they're different from what we saw, not just with Impatiens, but we don't have the same products that are going to be effective against both Pythium and gray mold. So we'll need two different products, okay? If the intervals are the same, we need to think about whether we're going to tank mix or whether we're going to spray in some type of alternating schedule. And then, of course, we need to think about those less common diseases. That was the late blight, which is a Phytophthora, and bacterial leaf spot. So late blight is a water mold caused by a water mold. Mycora, we've seen that one already. Previcure flex, remember we saw it for Pythium. And then bacterial spot. Bacterial diseases are very different than fungal and water mold diseases, but copper kind of comes into play, especially with bacterial diseases. And mancozeb, we saw mancozeb earlier with our Impatiens downy mildew. So the only thing I want to drive home there is that when you have multiple crops in a greenhouse, it's always nice to have some products that will cross over and that we don't have to have so many products in our arsenal. Okay, so in summary, developing a fungicide program can be complex. There are a lot of moving parts, but a grower has to do that for their particular scenario. So there's no really magic formula that we can give an example spray schedule, but each grower has to make all of their own considerations when putting together a spray schedule. I've listed some resources here. Here at the University of Kentucky, we do have resources that are often Kentucky specific, but they can be a little bit flexible. There's some educational materials there. We have a lot of these resources linked, so feel free to peruse our site to see if anything applies to you. Also, our social media, anytime there's alerts or any kind of new publications, we'll run it through on our social media accounts. And those are KY Plant Disease on Facebook and Twitter, and Kentucky Pest News is our weekly newsletter. So thank you very much, and best of luck with your growing season. Thanks.